This is the last section in Module 7, Section 16, that wraps up transload by talking about factors for 3PL selection and site location. The approach that we take here is very consistent with the vetting process we suggested for choosing CFS operators at origin. We'll see a lot of consistency in what we're talking about here, bearing in mind that the transload operation or operations is here in the United States. Let's start by saying that the pictures we see on each slide depicts the outside of the building of the photos we saw previously of the gentleman stripping the ocean container. An actual facility in Southern California in very close proximity, less than 5 miles from the ports of LA Long Beach. We'll talk more about these pictures and some of the details in just a second. Much like the vetting of a CFS facility at origin, a U.S. importer has to scrutinize the capabilities of a transload operator too. Before we look at the variables in the equation that an importer should be looking at when vetting out a CFS, there's an important consideration we see in bullet 2. The importer must also decide to what degree, if any, he or she wants to integrate services. This is the same theme that we talked about with integrating CFS operations and ocean transportation operations. Now we're looking at it at the tail end of the inbound process, that being the transload facility. But do we want to integrate upstream? Because CFS operators will offer the same inbound ocean transportation services as we talked about in previous sections. What are they? And we can run through them quickly because we've talked about them a bunch. PO management, origin forwarding services, ASN generation, the main mode of transportation, the actual ocean freight. They will also offer U.S. Customs clearance, drayage services from the port of discharge in the U.S. to the transload facility, the actual transload services themselves, and then the coordination of domestic U.S. transportation from the transload operation out to DCs throughout the United States. Really, very, very similar to the same portfolio of services that we talked about when looking at buyers console, direct-to-store, etc. We're just looking at those services from the transload facility upstream compared to when we analyze the CFS operations looking at services going downstream. It's really a matter of perspective where we are in the physical inbound supply chain. With that said, there are indeed a number of factors to consider when selecting a transload partner, a 3PL that runs a transload operation. Where is the facility location relative to the port of discharge? As we noted a couple of minutes ago, in the picture we have to the right, that transload facility is no more than 5 miles from the port of LA Long Beach. Regardless of where we're thinking about having a transload operation, we want to consider the size of the building. How big is the actual building? What is its layout? Just like in a CFS, we want minimum storage capability in a transload operation, meaning we want a lot of floor space to be able to manipulate cargo as it comes out of ocean containers and goes into domestic trailers. A very important factor is the number of receiving and shipping doors as well, and that's what we see to the right. We have to have access to enough doors so the operation runs smoothly. For example, in our picture, we'll notice a 45-foot ocean container. Next to that container to the left is a 53-foot trailer. That's actually a rail trailer that is going to be receiving goods coming out of the 45-footer, going into that 53-foot green trailer that will be shipped on the rail out to a DC going somewhere. That is called a swing operation. When the ocean container is at one door and a domestic trailer or trailers are at doors adjacent to the ocean container, because the goods come out very quickly, they're swung right around and go into the domestic trailers. That is what the gentlemen were doing in the previous photos we saw. Same building. Previous photos from the inside, these photos from the outside. Probably the biggest variable that importers don't think about is the size and capacity of the container/trailer patio, the yard that we can see in the forefront, or at least part of it in the forefront of our picture. Sometimes importers think about the transload facility as the building, the floor space, the doors. Sure, that's very important stuff to be thinking about. You also want to focus on how big the yard is, because we have ocean containers coming in, we have domestic trailers coming in and out. Sometimes we have a trailer pool where we keep a bunch of empty domestic trailers there to switch in and out. All of that takes up space. The yard space, the patio as it sometimes is called, equally important to the size and layout of the building. Some other things to be thinking about as an importer looking at a transload operation: partner and location. These are almost always going to be shared facilities. We as the importer, unless we're really huge and can take up a whole building, aren't going to be the only importer operating out of a transload building. Small to medium-sized importers, as an example, almost always operate transload with a third-party logistics provider in a shared facility. We, as the importer, are going to have some neighbors in this building. Who are they? How big is their operation? How many doors do they take up? How much yard space do they take up? And where do we fit into the grand scheme of things? That is consistent with the second sub-bullet point, the building's capacity to take on new clients. We don't want to get ourselves into a transload operation that is 90-95% at capacity. That's just going to create problems for everybody. What are the security measures in the building? Fenced off operation, perimeter. A guard shack and a gate is really important in a transload operation. Security measures are important. On the technology side of things, what is the operating technology that the transload operator, the 3PL, uses? For both a warehouse management system to run the transload operation and potentially a TMS, a transportation management system, that will coordinate the outbound movement of domestic trailers should the U.S. importer decide to use the transload operator's capabilities as a transportation service provider. Another key factor is the ability to communicate electronically with supply chain partners, the ability of the transload partner to do that, to send electronic messages out to a digital platform, just like every other player in the supply chain is supposed to be able to do, to receive split instructions electronically, to send out acknowledgement of those split instructions to the U.S. importer, to send out advance ship notices for the domestic movement of trailers to inland points in the United States. That's what we're referring to. And naturally, what are their reporting capabilities? Operational reporting, financial reporting, etc. As we are looking at potential 3PL partners for transload, just like we saw for Origin CFS operations, we want to see expertise with designing and executing on SOPs specific to transload. Their use of KPIs, key performance indicators for sure. What are their hours of operation? 1 shift, 2 shift, 3 shifts? Do they work Saturday and Sunday, which can be a very important consideration? How many employees do they have? And a big component of the transload value proposition to be thinking about is the ratio of full-time employees versus temp labor. Many third-party logistics transload operators have a high percentage of temp labor. Needless to say, something we haven't mentioned yet, what is the fee structure for a transload operation? These aren't charity organizations here. These are 3PLs that charge for their services. Typically, the pricing for transload is based on a per container basis. X amount of dollars to strip a container. X amount of dollars to strip 500 containers in a year. That's what the fee structure looks like. It's on a per container basis. But don't forget those ancillaries. There's a bunch of them that might take place. Let's start to wrap things up in this module with a real-world example, the ideal transload facility. As the VP of Logistics for an importer of do-it-yourself auto parts and accessories, you have been charged with selecting a transload partner facility near the port of Norfolk, Virginia. The company's imports come in from both Asia and Europe, and the Norfolk operation will service 3 DCs located in the mid-Atlantic region. What should you consider when seeking the ideal transload facility? Let's start by saying it's not just the transload facility by itself. We have to look at some other things. From an integrated perspective, you should not only consider the facility itself, but also its supporting infrastructure. For example, what are the frequency of port calls for ships coming into Norfolk out of Asia and Europe? And what are the hours of operation of the terminals? Why would we ask that question? Because we need to know at what times during day or night we're going to have access to containers that are on the terminals so we can dray them out to the transload facility. Second, where are most of the transload facilities that support Norfolk located, and how far are they from the terminals? Also, you'll want to look at rail and highway capabilities that enable outbound transportation to your 3 regional DCs in that Mid-Atlantic region. Last paragraph. In terms of the transload operation itself, you will be looking for a building with sufficient floor space and doors, but you will also want to focus on the yard size of the operation in particular. We talked about that. Let's reiterate the point. Transload is as much about yard capabilities as floor space, and if the container yard isn't big enough, it will be difficult to manage inbound ocean containers as well as the trailer pool you'll need for outbound loads. Hopefully this real-world example ties everything together that we've spoke of thus far. That will be it for Module 7. These are the objectives we had when we started out. Let's run through them quickly. And as always, you can judge if we met our objectives. First, we wanted to introduce the predominant ocean import operating models used in global trade. We presented 5. They are indeed the dominant models. We wanted to demonstrate how ocean import operating models impact functional areas like purchasing and inventory management. We spoke of these import operating models as exercises in the allocation of inventory. That was one of our main goals, to do just that. Third, provide strategic insights into how best to select an ocean import model. And then finally, share some detailed operational information on each model. That is the end of Module 7. In Module 8, we're going to pick up with air freight and how air freight can be used to complement an overall inbound supply chain. Some great detail, some interesting real-world examples. Do come back quickly.